The rain pounded against the glass with such force that Elizabeth woke up. The woman struggled to pull her head away from the pillow. She was splitting. Migraine for rain, thought Elizabeth Holmes, and yawned unhappily. By an effort of will, the woman forced herself to get up. She put her head to the back of her head, went to the big window, and slid the blinds. The picture before her eyes was dreary beyond belief. Bare trees, an empty yard, and dark windows across the street. The weather was getting worse. Autumnal slush and sharp and gusty wind, and the rain. It had been raining non-stop for the third 24 hours. Elizabeth was tormented by insomnia. Oh, who knew what an exhausting thing it was, and how clingy one can relax, tension pounding in all her veins. Thoughts like a swarm of flies, circling and circling in her head. All efficiency disappears. The woman sighed heavily and went to the kitchen. There, in a cupboard, she found sleeping pills, took a pill, drinking water from a glass. Elizabeth's gaze fell on a silver teaspoon and grazed Willie. She had given to her husband on his Angel's Day, exactly 1 year ago. Now, her beloved was not around and was not on this earth. She could not accept his departure and could not realize that Willie will no longer stir the sugar with a spoon in his coffee in the morning. He wouldn't see the pleasure with which his sweet Liz sipped the flavored beverage, and he wouldn't enjoy her gorgeous, as he always told her, Hollywood smile. Time passed, and to realize his demise, his passing into oblivion. Elizabeth could not. The quiet but insistent voice of the old woman she had dreamed about was still in her ears, who, in a puff of fog, smiled enigmatically and uttered a strange phrase. "You will see the answer to your husband's death in a photograph." Willie died young, falling out of the hotel window. The official case file said it was an accident. But as she mentally delved into the past, Liz found more and more oddities in her husband's behavior. At that time, she didn't pay much attention to them, but in the light of his death, they become reference point for the search for the truth, which line up into a fragile version. But Elizabeth Holmes thought more and more often that her husband had been killed. Who and why was to be found out. For the first time, she saw fright in her husband's eyes and the seaside resort where they had come to spend their vacation. Beautiful view, gentle sunshine, white sand. She breathed there with her entire chest, enjoying the clean air and the whispering of the waves at night. Willie was calm and contented, showing no apprehension or anxiety, but occasionally his gaze will cloud and sadness will appear. Elizabeth put it down to one thing. 6 months ago, Willie had lost a friend, young and vigorous. He had died barely out of wedlock with his husband. He had been drinking coffee and chatting with him in a cafe, and then he came out of there, took a couple of steps, fell, and Freddie Cage's heart stopped. And then he, Willie, was left there, out of reach. Pain gripped her soul. He was dead, and her love grew stronger day by day. The memory smothered her with their sweetness. Losing her husband for Elizabeth means losing herself. She had to do something in his memory, or she would go mad. Now Liz was troubled by the question, where to begin, where to find the threads of the tangle that will lead her to the solution of her husband's death. So she decided to return to the place of his death. That is, to the Adriatic coast, to the place that had once seemed like a paradise to her. She booked the same rooms in a hotel, where they lived to keep herself in suspense. Once there, she remembered their routine and began to follow it. She furnished the entire room with pictures of her husband, so that looking at them, she had no desire to go back. Elizabeth ate breakfast and lunch in the same dining room. She remembered when her husband had ordered and took those dishes for herself. She always sat alone at the table, asking not to be seated. But one evening, a man of about 25 sat across from her. He moved closer to the table, pulling up a chair. "I think it was your husband who died here this summer?" the stranger asked. Elizabeth wanted to pull the bald man in his place and reprimand him for being so unapologetic about prying into other people's lives. But she remained silent, and admiration involuntarily appeared in her eyes. The man was handsome and charming, had a swarthy face with high cheekbones, beautiful slanted eyes of sky blue hue, a straight nose, and an ironic smile. His golden curls in a short haircut gave him a mischievous, somewhat boyish look. So instead of pulling away as usual or responding sharply, Elizabeth spoke up. "Yes, exactly. Did someone tell you about it?" "No, not at all." Time had passed and the discussion had subsided. "It's just that I was vacationing here all the time. I used to watch your couple a lot. I'm sorry, it's not curiosity, but genuine and perhaps a little professional interest. I write detectives. For myself, of course. Sometimes I publish in magazines. You probably haven't heard my name. Even if you have read them, I publish my books under a pseudonym. Agus Mangus. Don't look at it that way. But it's in a book, and the editor approved it. They said it was for publicity. My real name is John Smith." "Nice to meet you. I'm Elizabeth Holmes." "You know, Liz, it seemed to me at the time that your husband was on the verge of nervous breakdown. He was very anxious and tense." "How so?" The woman was surprised. "You're a stranger. You saw the signs and I didn't." "I also noticed everything, did not pay attention, and wrote it off as a poor health or a bad mood. After all, the husband probably said he was fine, and he used to believe him. Don't punish me for being intrusive and broadcasting my opinion, but he couldn't have committed suicide. I mean, Willie seemed like a very reasonable man. I talked to him, and it turned out that his education was in mathematics, so he had a certain kind of mind. Rational. Common sense prevails over feeling in such people, and such an emotional act does not fit the personality characteristics. You came to vacation together, choose rarely, and did not part with each other practically for a minute. And suddenly he leaves you like this. No, something's not right. Something needs to be added up. Who told you about the suicide?" "That theory hasn't been confirmed. Officially, Willie fell from a height by accident. I think he had help. I came back here to find out how it happened, and why there was worry in his clear, calm eyes. Perhaps I can help you a little," John said sadly. "The fact that I was unwitting witness to his conversation on a phone. I get up very early, practically at first light. Had to swim at dawn, you know. That time I live on the same floor as you, and I was passing by a balcony when I heard your husband talking to someone. He said he found out who killed Freddie." "Freddie?" "That his high school friend who was found dead. The official story was that the guy had a drug overdose." "What did he call the person he was talking to?" "Oh, I'm trying to remember. Although, wait a minute. Tim, Jim, maybe John. Like me." "Thank you. You're giving me a lead." "You're welcome. I hope you will use my services if you need me to investigate. I have some experience of this kind of work. Amateurism, in theory." but your investigation needs to be more professional. Yes, I will call you if you leave me your phone number. Some logic and phenomenal powers of observation never hurt anyone. The game of detective quickly brought Elizabeth and Joan close together. They spent the rest of their days together, separating only in the late afternoon to sleep in their rooms. They found a lot of common ground, and their views on the world, political games, and the assessment of historical events, their interest in literature, painting, and music were also in contact. For the first time since her husband's death, Elizabeth felt as if she had finally breathed a fresh breath of air in its stuffy room. She liked John more and more, and they developed a strong friendship. There was no room for passion, sensuality, or attraction. Instead, there was a unity of souls. After a couple of days, Elizabeth decided to return to her hometown, and John was still left to rest, but the man was constantly in touch. Elizabeth went to work after a short vacation. After her husband's death, she left dispatch and asked to be transferred to flight attendants for a while. She wanted some time to recuperate, to free herself from her absent-mindedness, and to distract herself. Elizabeth always felt anxious before takeoff, even though the sky was becoming a second home to her. She loved her job as flight attendant and the opportunity to meet new people, help them, and make their flights comfortable. She loved watching the clouds float past the porthole, and every time the plane touched the ground, she felt a rush of better feelings from another successful flight. She did her work with redoubled zeal. When she returned to her and Willie's apartment, Elizabeth remembered that Willie had been sitting by his laptop a lot lately. She opened the lid, turned it on, and typed in a simple code. The password was the same for the two of them. This fact caused her to be confused again. They weren't hiding anything from each other, were they, or did he have a secret of his own? She resolutely pulled the computer toward her and began to scrutinize its contents. One of the documents made her wary. She read it aloud. Lisa's hand reached for the phone. "We need to get John on the phone. Meet and discuss the information we've gotten." "Hello, Sherlock on the line?" He joked on the other end of the receiver. "That's what home calls." She played along with him. "I found something on my husband's computer. We must meet." "I'm ready. I will come whatever you say," Smith answered. Elizabeth saw him on a bench in the public garden. He hadn't changed much since their last meeting, except that his tan had faded. She walked over and sat down next to him. The man smiled welcomely. "I found his notes on Joe's death on Willie's laptop. He believed that his high school friend had never taken drugs. He didn't have cravings, and there were no signs of behavioral changes either. Apparently, your husband found some evidence to support his theory, and that's why they took him out. Do you think he was on the trail of the killer?" "No, absolutely. We need inside information from someone who knows Jim's family. But there are 2 single women. I don't know what to do." "I know what to do. We should rent a house near them and pretend to be a married couple." "What do you mean?" "A small cozy cottage on the street where Freddie Cage's widow and mother live." A couple of days later, John and Lisa checked into the rental. Once inside, they immediately felt at home. The spacious living room, with soft sofas and warm fireplace, invited them to relax after work. The bright kitchen inspired culinary experiments. And in the bedroom, with windows overlooking the picturesque garden, Elizabeth and John could enjoy peace and tranquility if they were married. On the other hand, they had to spend their nights in separate rooms. Smith graciously gave Lisa the upstairs bedroom while he sat in the inn. Laughing at the contrived conspiracy, Lisa and John resolutely set about their business. Under the guise of loving married couple, they used their charm and cunning to gain the trust of Frankie's widow and mother. Their goal was clear: to ferret out anything hiding from view and uncover a secret that could shed light on the murderous death of Fred and Willie. Finally, the constant communication with the Cages had paid off. Elizabeth and John were now frequent visitors to their home. Anna Cage met them and escorted them to the living room. Agnes, Jim's mother, sat at the large glass table. She was an elderly woman with a working face. Her back was straight as a tow string. "Have a seat," she invited. John usually took a seat across from her. Then he would kindly invite her to accompany him to the bedroom. After all, she was quickly tired and went to bed early. There was a tradition between them. They would sit down on a small sofa in the hall on the second floor and have a little chat. Agnes was talkative and open with the young writer. She had read all his novels and was fascinated by him as a man. John tried to please her in every way and was very attentive. Agnes began to talk very frankly about her youth and relationship with her husband, warmly remembering her son and criticizing his wife, with whom she had to share the roof because Jim had left the house to her as an inheritance. "My dear," Agnes began, leaning towards to her neighbor, "I must tell you something that has been weighing on my mind for a long time. You know that my dear son had a mistress whom found out about not long ago. Guess who's to blame? Our Anna. She always pretended she didn't know anything, but I saw her crying over some picture she found in his jacket. Then she wouldn't talk about it. She endured and suffered." John tensed. "There it is. The very thread. All that left is to pull it." He grimaced. Meanwhile, downstairs, Elizabeth was having a frank conversation with Anna. "Agnes is a complicated person, but Freddie's dead now, and I'm obligated to look after her. I can't abandon the old woman, especially since her hypertension often bothers me." The woman smiled as she stood up. She poured fragrant tea into cups and gestured to the guests to taste the treats on the table, like chocolate, oatmeal cookies, fruit pastilles. "Excuse me, Anna, and how do you live with her?" Lisa questioned the woman. She shrugged her shoulders and sat down in her seat. "It's not easy, but I don't want to complain." Elizabeth looked at her face and noticed how Anna's eyes became moist. "Freddie and I had a good life. There is a lot to remember, nice things. But when his career took off, when he was appointed heir of banking, everything changed," she sobbed. "He became cold, avoided intimacy, and spent all his time at work. And then he gave up on me altogether. He just came home to avoid upsetting my mother. It's as simple and old as daylight. There was someone else, and I couldn't bear it and burst into tears." Elizabeth came up to her and stroked her sloping shoulders affectionately. "Oh, my dear, I've turned your soul upside down with my questions. If you only knew how much I sympathize with you." And then the woman pulled herself together and continued, "I found that picture in his other garment. I will show you now." She rose from her seat and left to the room. Soon she came back and handed Lisa the card. A beautiful red-haired lady in expensive clothes looked at her. "She's pretty," Elizabeth couldn't help herself. "And rich. The wife of a bank owner. What did she see in Freddie? It's hard to answer. Simple guy, and he's like a madman. I couldn't see anything by her." The sudden chiming of the clock made the two of them shudder. They looked at each other, rose from their seats, and said goodbye. Down the stairs just then came Joan. Together they said goodbye to Anna and left. At home, They exchanged the information they had gotten. Smith was very excited. So here's the picture of a woman. You should have gotten it from Anna. That will have helped us get a lead on the lady. But if Freddie screws someone, what's your husband go to do with it? I don't know, Joan. There are more and more questions. They stared at each other in bewilderment as the wood crackled in the fireplace and the wind howled outside. John entered the kitchen with an open bottle of champagne. He set everything next to each other on the fireplace table and nodded at the vase of tangerines. Well, there's something to eat. I love champagne and tangerines, but there was still strawberries in the fridge. I will be right back for them. Lisa brought carefully washed berries in a beautiful glass vase. She put it on a table, and they sat opposite each other. Joan poured the champagne, and they both reclined in the soft armchairs, sipped happily from their glasses, and took a large juicy strawberry in their hands. Man smiled contentedly as he took a bite. Yes, I see that we do it almost synchronously, said Lisa quietly. So I conclude that you also like champagne with strawberries. Very much I do, the man replied, looking at Elizabeth frankly. I want to continue, he purred. It depends on what kind of event you have to offer, she replied. Lisa and John rose from their seats simultaneously and embraced like magnets, attracting each other. Their lips came together in a passionate kiss. After that, they went to the bedroom and merged their bodies. They spent the time before dawn in loving caresses on the bed, under the fluttering white canopy. Their romantic entanglement lasted only a week. They became not only lovers but also good friends. Before the cage house burned down and Anna Jim's mother died in the fire, they enjoyed life lightly. After that, some sobering came to Elizabeth. She realized she had been playing detective and dragged her lover into it. The woman became depressed and did not answer his calls, locked herself in the apartment alone, taking a leave of absence at work at her own expense. She kept thinking that she was looking for a malice in the death of her husband and his friend. As it happens, she was drinking tea only recently and socializing with people, and they were killed in an accident. In time, Elizabeth recovered. She decided to apologize to John and ask for forgiveness for everything. She called him every day, but the subscriber was out of range. The woman clutched her head, marveling at her stillness. After all, Lisa knew virtually nothing about John. She only had his phone number. Elizabeth realized that she had lost him, hurt him, and was unlikely to meet him again. Her life settled down, and she went back to work. Once again, the sky took over and the past began to recede. She allowed herself to hope and dream of a good life ahead. On one of her flights, she served drinks to passengers with a big smile. As she bent over to offer them to a couple at the end of the cabin, her gaze came across the face of John, and sitting next to him was the woman in the picture. Lisa's eyes blurred, her head spun, and as she fainted, she had time to think that her suspicions about the murder of her husband and his high school friend were not in vain. Oh, and the cage woman too. Elizabeth woke up in John's arms. So, Holmes in a skirt? You've had enough. Why did you stick your pretty little nose everywhere? This is Laura, my wife. Freddie seduced her, and I punish him for it. That fool kept her picture, and that's how he signed his mother and his wife death warrant. And your husband made the fatal mistake of meeting his friend and telling him about his affair with Laura, after I killed the lecturer by wearing a waiter's uniform and slipping a horse dose of drugs into his glass. Willie started bothering my wife and trying to find the truth. So she fell out the window. And then I saw you there. And I knew I had to keep an eye on you, or you'd be mess. But you don't have to be afraid now. You're not a danger to us. There is no proof other than your word. All the evidence and witnesses have been burned. So go live your life. John let her go. The plane left. She watched them go, wondering if there was any justice in the world. Her eyes filled with tears. A couple of hours later, her company jetliner took off, and a tsunami hit the bench in Tahiti. Lisa had never heard from John and his wife again.